psychic history of Ra. Listen carefully, as this is no hoax, and it will be very interesting. Through my self-history, Amon-Ra was an ancient Egyptian god who was revered as king of gods and gods of kings. Also, Amon is the true king of kings, lord of lords. He was founded as god through the mysterious pharaoh Akhenaten. Studies show that ancient Egyptian followed the Enlightenment way of using the third eye for spiritual abilities such as psychic and magic. This is possibly how Akhenaten found Amon-Ra to be god. Amon was the chief of the Egyptian gods. In the early days of the Egyptian civilization, he was worshipped as two separate gods. Amon was the god who created the universe. Ra was the god of the sun and light, who traveled across the sky every day in a burning boat. I will come back to this later. Now I want to get into myself, before talking on more on this subject. My name is Anton Rodriguez, born the 25th of April 1988 in East Midlands, Leicester, United Kingdom. From a young age I have known of the existence of angels and the afterlife, since being as young as I remember. I have had conversations with angel, and also at a few times I have seen them. They tell me of being Amon-Ra, their king of gods. I also communicate with my spirit, who speaks at certain times and tells me premonition that are always right for in life. Information I've collected. Name in spirit: Zeus, Amon-Ra. Wife: Asherah, Ori, or Ra. Also Nefertari, goes by names of a wives of God. 15th universe dimensions and Earth 0. 15th with planes within them realms. Fought 3 Persian wars in Egypt and survived. Died by weather disaster of some type of sandstorm. Empathy brings all names of Amon, who is Capri, Amon-Ra, Ori, month Osiris, atom point Aton. Elyor, etc. Young Egyptian wearing the royal side lock of youth, looks exactly my image, and realize it is myself. I came to power through the unification of the cult of Amon, and as heir to the throne, took power through my own powerful ways at the age of 13. Communication teachings through mediumship with a woman, who is Aphrodite, and Hathuara claims to be daughter of myself, Amon-Ra. Every spirit I speak to knows me as Amon, king of gods. I'm the man spoke about in the track by M83. Midnight City. In the lyrics, waiting for Ra. Waiting for Anton. Look and see. The eye. It's his symbol. History of Amon. Amon in an Egyptian context. Amon in hieroglyphs is an Egyptian deity. Amon belonged to a religious, mythological, and cosmological belief system that developed in the Nile River basin from earliest prehistory to around 525 BCE. Indeed, it was during this relatively late period in Egyptian cultural development, a time when they first felt their beliefs threatened by foreigners, that many of their myths, legends and religious beliefs were first recorded. 2. The cults were generally fairly localized phenomena, with different deities having the place of honor in different communities. 3. Yet, the Egyptian gods, unlike those in many other pantheons, were relatively ill-defined. As Frankfurt notes, if we compare two of the Egyptian gods, we find not two personages, but two sets of functions and emblems. The hymns and prayers addressed to these gods differ only in the epithets and attributes used. There is no hint that the hymns were addressed to individuals differing in character. 4. One reason for this was the undeniable fact that the Egyptian gods were seen as utterly immanent. They represented, and were continuous with, particular discrete element of the natural world. 5. Thus, those Egyptian gods who did develop characters and mythologies were generally quite portable, as they could retain their discrete forms without interfering with the various cults already in practice elsewhere. Furthermore, this flexibility was what permitted the development of multipartite cults, that is, the cult of Amon, which unified the domains of Amon and Ra, as the spheres of influence of these various deities were often complementary. 6. The worldview engendered by ancient Egyptian religion was uniquely defined by the geographical and calendrical realities of its believers' lives. The Egyptians viewed both history and cosmology as being well-ordered, cyclical and dependable. As a result, all changes were interpreted as either inconsequential deviations from the cosmic plan or cyclical transformations required by it. 7. The major result of this perspective, in terms of the religious imagination, was to reduce the relevance of the present, as the entirety of history, when conceived of cyclically, was defined during the creation of the cosmos. The only other aporia in such an understanding is death, which seems to present a radical break with continuity. To maintain the integrity of this worldview, an intricate system of practices and beliefs, including the extensive mythic geographies of the afterlife, texts providing moral guidance for this life and the next, and rituals designed to facilitate the transportation into the afterlife, was developed, whose primary purpose was to emphasize the unending continuation of existence. 8. Given these two cultural foci, it is understandable that the tales recorded within this mythological corpus tended to be either creation accounts or depictions of the world of the dead, with a particular focus on the relationship between the gods and their human constituents. Etymology: Amon's name is first attested to in Egyptian records as Im, which can be translated as the hidden. 9. Since vowels were not written in Egyptian hieroglyphics, Egyptologists, in their hypothetical reconstruction of the spoken language, have argued that it would have originally been pronounced *yamnu, Yamana. The name survives, with unchanged meaning, as the Coptic Amon, the Ethiopian Amen, and the Greek Amon. 10. Some scholars have noted a strong linguistic parallel between the names of Amon, Amen, and Minimum, an ancient deity who shared many areas of patronage and influence with his more popular contemporary. This veracity of this potential identification is bolstered by the fact that, historically speaking, the cult of Amon did supplant the worship of Minimum, especially in the area around Thebes, from whence it originated. 11. Development of the cult of Amon. As with many Egyptian deities, the cult of Amon, and the myths associated with it, developed through a long process of syncretism and theological innovation, both of which were tempered by the political fortunes of the cult's home region. While the understandings discussed below can broadly be divided into historical periods, it should be noted that the depictions of the god, unless otherwise noted, were cumulative. For example, Amon's later association with fertility seems to have supplemented, rather than overriding, his previous characterizations as a creator god and a royal patron. Early cult: Amon as creator god and patron of Thebes. Amon was, to begin with, the local deity of Thebes, when it was an unimportant town on the east bank of the river, about the region now occupied by the temple of Karnak. Already characterized as a hidden one, the god was identified with the wind, an invisible but immanent presence in the region. 12. And also with the hidden and unknown creative power which was associated with the primeval abyss that predated the creation of this world. 13. In this context, he, along with his female counterpart / consortum unit, is mentioned in the pyramid texts, a compilation of inscriptions from the Old Kingdom period, 268 to 2134 BCE. Thy established offering is thine, only one, none, together with an endpoint T, Nornet, ye two sources of the gods. Protecting the gods with your shade point. Thy established offering is thine, O Am, together with Amnet, ye two sources of the gods, protecting the gods with your shade. 14. Describing this earliest mention of the deity, Budge notes that the explicit parallel between Nun/Nornet and Amon/Amunet, the former representing the primordial void, indicates that the authors and editors of the pyramid texts assigned great antiquity to their existence. 15. By the first intermediate period, 2183 to 2055 BCE, these beliefs were further elaborated, with the god coming to be interpreted as the creator of the universe, and, resultantly, as the creator of the celestial pantheon. 16. These developments are well summarized by Geraldine Pinch. Amon tended to be the subject of speculative theology, rather than mythical narratives, but he did play a role in the creation myths of Hermopolis, an Upper Kingdom city relatively close to Thebes. One of his incarnations was as the Great Shrieker, a primeval goose whose victory shout was the first sound. In some accounts, this primeval goose laid the world egg. In others, Amon fertilized or created this egg in his ram-headed serpent form known as Kemetef. 17. He who has completed his moment. The temple of Medinet Habu in western Thebes was sometimes identified as the location of this primal event. A cult statue of the Amon of Karnak regularly visited this temple during festival processions to renew the process of creation. 18. During this age, Amon was also assigned a female companion, aside from Amunet, who is better characterized as the god's own female aspect. Given his increasing identification with the creation of the cosmos, it was logical that he be united with Mut, a popular mother goddess of the Theban region. Within the context of this new family, he was thought to have fathered a son, either Menthu, a local war god who became subordinate to him, or Khons, a lunar deity. 19. The increasing importance of Amon can be strongly tied to the political fortunes of the Theban nome during this period of the Egyptian dynastic history. Most specifically, the 11th dynasty, California 2130-1990 BCE, was founded by a family from the area around Thebes itself, which thereby catapulted their favored deities into national prominence. The name of Amon came to be incorporated in the monikers of many rulers from this dynasty, such as Amon M, founder of the 12th dynasty, 1991-1802 BCE, whose name can be literally translated as Amon is preeminent or the god Amon is first. The honors accorded to the god led to an increased level of expenditure at his various cult centers, most notably at the Temple of Karnak, which became one of the most well-appointed in the kingdom. 20. In this phase of the cult's development, Amon was primarily depicted in human form, seated on a throne, wearing a plain circlet from which rise two straight parallel plumes, possibly symbolic of the tail feathers of a bird, a reference to his earliest characterization as a wind god. Two main types are seen. In the one he is seated on a throne, in the other he is standing, ithiphallic, holding a scourge, precisely like Minimum, the god of Coptus and Chemis, Akhmim, a god whose association with Amon is discussed above. Rise to national prominence when the Theban royal family of the 17th dynasty drove out the Hyksos. Amon, as the god of the royal city, was again prominent. Given the oppression of the Egyptians under their Hyksos rulers, their victory, which was attributed to the supreme god Amon, was seen as the god's championing of the less fortunate. Consequently, Amon came to be seen as a benevolent defender of the disadvantaged, and came to be titled Vizier of the Poor. 21. Indeed, as the fortunes of these Theban dynasties were extended, Amon, their patron god, came to be associated with the office of the ruler. For instance, in his chief cult temple at Karnak in Thebes, Amon, lord of the thrones of the two lands, ruled as a divine pharaoh. 22. However, it was not until the expansionistic military successes of the 18th dynasty, 1550 to 1292 BCE, that Amon began to assume the proportions of a universal god for the Egyptians, eclipsing, or becoming syncretized with, most other deities, and asserting his power over the gods of foreign lands. At this time, the pharaohs credited all their successful enterprises to the god, which led them to lavish their wealth, and captured spoil on his temples. 23. Sun god Amun-Ra and hieroglyphs Amun-Ra. As Amon's cult spread throughout the empire, the hidden one became identified with Ra, the sun god worshipped as lord of the cosmos in the lower kingdom. This identification led to a merger of identities, with the two deities joined into the composite form Amun-Ra. As Ra had been the father of Shu and Tefnut, and the remainder of the Enad, paralleling Amon's parentage of the Ogdoad, Amun-Ra was identified as the father of all Egyptian gods. This merger also saw Amun-Ra adopting the role of sun god, with Ra as the visible aspect of the sun and Amon as the hidden aspect, representing the seeming disappearance of the solar disk at night. Throughout the New Kingdom period, 1570 to 1070 BCE, Amun-Ra was chief deity of the Egyptian religious system, a widespread devotional adoration that was even attested to in the names of monarchs. From Amenhotep, Amon is satisfied to Tutankhamun, the living image of Amon. These rulers were also associated with the god through a popular myth that they were each conceived following a mystical union between their mothers and Amon. 24. Though the worship of the god was briefly halted under Akhenaten, it is still fair to say that it was the single most important cult in Egypt for over 500 years. 25. Fertility god Amon also came to be associated with various ram-headed deities that were popular in Egypt and surrounding areas at the time. Indeed, his most frequent and celebrated incarnation was the woolly sheep with curved Amon horns, as opposed to the oldest native breed with long horizontal twisted horns and hairy coat, sacred Tuknamork Numis. In this guise, he was worshipped as a fertility god, both in Egypt and in recently conquered Nubia, Kush, where he incorporated the identity of their chief deity. Given their association with fertility, Amon also began to absorb the identity of Minimum, a god representing sexual potency, becoming Amon-Min. This association with virility led to Amon-Min gaining the epithet Kamutef, meaning bull of his mother, an epithet that suggests both that the god was self-engendered, meaning that he begot himself on his mother, the cow who personified the goddess of the sky and of creation, and also conveys the sexual energy of the bull, or ram, which, for the Egyptians, was a symbol of strength and fertility. Excellence. 26. Declined the sarcophagus of a priestess of Amon-Ra circa 1000 BCE at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. Though the cult of Amon remained a significant social force throughout the 20th dynasty, 1190 to 1077 BCE, it gradually started to fade in importance during the social upheaval that followed. As the sovereignty of the central leadership weakened, the division between Upper and Lower Egypt began to reassert itself. This led to great decrease in the importance of Thebes and all deities associated with the city. Indeed, Thebes would have rapidly decayed had it not been for the piety of the kings of Nubia towards Amon, whose worship had long prevailed in their country. However, in the rest of Egypt, the popularity of his cult was rapidly overtaken by the less divisive cult of the Osiris and Isis, which had not been associated with the reviled Akhenaten. Thus, his identity became first subsumed into Ra-Herakti, who still remained an identifiable figure in the Osiris cult, but ultimately became merely an aspect of Horus. 27. This decline is poignantly depicted in Budge's encyclopedic survey The Gods of the Egyptians. When the last Ramesses was dead, the high priest of Amen-Ra became king of Egypt almost as a matter of course, and he and his immediate successors formed the 21st dynasty, or the dynasty of the priest kings of Egypt. Their chief aim was to maintain the power of their god and of their own order, and for some years they succeeded in doing so, but they were priests and not warriors, and their want of funds became more and more pressing for the simple reason that they had no means of enforcing the payment of tribute by the peoples and tribes who, even under the later kings bearing the name of Ramesses, acknowledged the sovereignty of Egypt. Meanwhile, the poverty of the inhabitants of Thebes increased rapidly, and they were not only unable to contribute to the maintenance of the acres of temple buildings and to the services of the god, but found it difficult to obtain a living notwithstanding their growing poverty and waning influence. The priests in no way abated the pretensions of their god or of themselves, and they continued to proclaim the glory and power of Amen-Ra. In spite of the increasing power of the Libyans and the Delta, 28. In areas outside of Egypt, where the Egyptians had previously brought the worship of Amon, the decline in the god's prestige was neither so precipitous nor so dire. In Nubia, where his name was pronounced Amen, he remained the national god, with priests at Meroe and Nabatia regulating the affairs of government, selecting kings, and erecting military expeditions via oracular knowledge. According to Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, 90 to 21 BCE, they were even able to compel kings to commit suicide, although their reign of terror ended in the 3rd century BCE, when Archimene, Ergomenes, a Kushite ruler, ordered that they be slain. 29. Likewise, in ancient Libya there remained a solitary oracle of Amon at the oasis of Siwa, in the heart of the Libyan desert. Such was its reputation among the Greeks that Alexander the Great journeyed there after the Battle of Issus, in order to be acknowledged as the son of Amon. 30. Finally, during the Hellenistic occupation of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Amon came to be syncretistically identified with Zeus, a logical enough choice, given the affiliations and realms of patronage shared by both deities. 31. Derived terms. Several extant English words have been derived from the name of Amon, via the Greek form Ammon, including ammonia and ammonite. Ammonia, as a chemical compound, was given its name by Swedish chemist Torbjörn Bergman in 1782. He chose ammonia because he had obtained the gas from salammoniac, salt deposits containing ammonium chloride found near Temple of Jupiter Ammon, from Egyptian god Ammon, in Libya. From GK ammoniacum belonging to Amon. 32. The Ammonites, an extinct class of cephalopods, had spiral shells resembling a ram's horns. As a result, the term was coined by Brugier from the Latin cornu, Ammonus, horn of Amon, the Egyptian god of life and reproduction, who was depicted with ram's horns, which the fossils resemble. 33. Likewise, there are two symmetrical regions of the hippocampus called the cornu ammonus, literally Ammon's horns, due to the horned appearance of the dark and light bands of cellular layers. 34.